My name's John O'Neill. I'm the son of Frank O'Neill, who is a syndicated cartoonist that lived on the Monterey Peninsula, primarily in Carmel and Carmel Valley. We moved up here from Santa Monica, where he went to art school in 1955, and began to work up here as a freelance cartoonist, doing single panel drawings primarily out of his house. And in 1958, I believe, became syndicated with the National Enterprise Association, sort of set off his career, and continued the syndication of the cartoon strip until 1973, and he died in 1988. There's a number of cartoonists on the peninsula that he worked with. Hank Ketchum was one of them, Dennis the Menace, Lee Hawley with comic strip Ponytail was a contributor, Eldon Dini, Gus Ariola. There's a whole variety of cartoonists that he associated with. The peninsula has got a history of art. The whole genre has changed a little bit through the years. A lot of these people have expired. The introduction of the internet and software animation for cartooning has changed things quite a bit. My father moved from Santa Monica, where he went to the Miramar School of Art, on a road trip by himself without my sister or myself or my mother, and arrived in Carmel Valley and bought a house sight unseen. He'd heard of the area. Other people that he had associated with had moved up in this area. Of course, Carmel had a colony of artists that was very successful for the longest time. And artists were coming from all over the place. Several of them came to Carmel Valley, Carmel, and you know, it was just a place that they congregated and seemed to get along with. And not just cartoonists, you're talking sculptors and painters as well. The artists, the cartoonists that were in this area in Carmel Valley, since they worked for themselves, they didn't need to go someplace else. They were able to, for the most part, work out of their homes. They were busy trying to sell their work to either magazines, freelance magazines individually, or the big prize was to become syndicated, to have a newspaper syndicate pick up your strip and carry it for 400 papers, and it was really the time that you would be successful at that point. So they could really live any place in the world that they wanted to, but the community of the peninsula was such that they were all kind of drawn to this area a little bit, and so that's why there were so many of them here. Hank Ketchum, who is probably the most well-known, just lived up the road, several of them just in the general vicinity of Carmel and Carmel Valley in particular. Hank Ketchum, who recently died, was probably the person that I remember the most. I was 5 years old when we moved up here, probably met his family. He had a son named Dennis. That's where the whole thing with Dennis the Menace came from, and spent some time with him. He was very close by. We played quite a bit. The other people that I remember were Bob Barnes. He had a comic strip called The Better Half that was also syndicated and very well known. They had no children, but these folks all socialized together quite a bit. They entertained together. They drank and partied together. It was a very flamboyant group, traveled together. That's what I remember. It was very special because I do remember being very flexible and being able to travel and go wherever we wanted to. A cartoonist's job really is just to maintain a certain schedule of making sure their work is received at a timely basis. As long as they get it done, they don't have to follow a regular schedule. And when my father finally got to the point where he had his strip syndicated in 1958, then the world opened up quite a bit, because at that point it's kind of the real measure of success in the profession. It's what everybody strives for. There's generally a lot of rejection. So the group that he hung out with were kind of these guys that already kind of made it, and we were very fortunate for that. My father did a lot of stuff early on, especially that he kind of incorporated his family. Before we moved up here, he worked with Red Book magazine and developed a series called Bringing Up Parents, where he sort of channeled me as the primary character, schooling the parents in different kind of mischievous formats. He did utilize me, he utilized my mother in the way he put things together. He'd come and ask me for ideas, and he'd worked at home, so I was able to see what he was doing at any given time, and I could recognize myself in his cartoons and so forth. If I walked up as a young boy to his drafting table, I could tell the character that he was representing was me. He would draw my mother in much the same way the same hairstyle and so forth, so it was all very obvious what he was doing, but he didn't incorporate family life completely into what he was doing. He was very good at what he did. He was a tremendous artist. I just remember as a young boy, you know, the drafting table they had, and then a canister of pens and inks and whatnot that was like the size of a bucket. Yeah, I'd try to get his attention, but he was pretty firm about making sure that I didn't get in his way too much. This comic strip veered off to a variety of different formats and not just ones of family life. So I wasn't as noticeable then as I was with some of the earlier stuff that he was doing, but he would always point out something that he got inspiration from me in, and so, you know, I appreciated it, but I was a young boy and I didn't pay too much attention. I was doing my own thing too. The wives of the cartoonists that I was exposed to had a pretty good situation because most of the women did not work. They raised their families and they socialized with the other people that they knew in the community that were also in the art business. Not like today where, you know, women are in the workplace. Back in those days it was, you know, kind of a single earner situation in the 50s and 60s, I would say. What's happening now as compared to 50 years ago is the advent of the internet in the last 15 years, and you know, software animation development has kind of taken the luster off the work that these guys did on an independent basis. For example, back in the 50s and in the 60s, my father's work, as well as some of these other local cartoonists, if you would have a Sunday page of cartoons, if you opened up the page, you would only see perhaps just, you know, 2 cartoon strips for an entire page. Now they'll cram 8 or 9 different strips in a much smaller format on there. The whole newspaper business has changed so much that it sure doesn't have the polish or prestige that it did many years ago because of the way the world's changed, you know. You have successful comic strips that everybody recognizes that are contemporary. You know, Gary Larson's The Far Side. There's a number of them, but back in those days, they didn't have the competition for, you know, entertainment that they have nowadays, so it's a little bit different. I moved back to Carmel Valley in 1998 after being gone for 27 or 28 years living in Southern California. The peninsula still, it's a very artistic place. None of that's really changed. I think it's just morphed into being, you know, different than it was back then. It was a different time and place. There was a strong bond between a lot of people that were in the same business back in that time. Now I think it's spread out a little bit more diverse. Certainly the cartoonist aspect of it, the group that we had back then is kind of, these fellows have all kind of expired now, and you know, you may see some reruns or whatnot, but and there really hasn't been something exactly similar to take their place. But the peninsula remains, you know, as artistic as ever. You'll have photographers or different venues that, you know, that have come up and taken their place.